They buried her name in silence, but the walls still whisper it when the fog rolls in. Eleanor Greaves, 12 years old, forgotten, but not gone. And what they did to her inside Ravenshade Asylum in 1902 was never meant to be known. You're not supposed to be hearing this. The Royal Archives sealed the truth. The doctors who tried to speak vanished. And yet, you're still here, listening. That means you've already begun the descent. Ravenshade wasn't an asylum, it was a gate. And Eleanor wasn't insane. She was a key, born into a world of symbols, summoned into fire, and caged in stone. You were told this was a ghost story. It's not. This is about systems, institutions, rituals, a machine that hides behind medicine, behind charity, behind the lie of sanity itself. Because every asylum hides one truth. It's not built to help the broken. It's built to contain what the world isn't ready to face. In Eleanor's case, it was knowledge. Ancient, pre-verbal, dangerous. The language she spoke wasn't gibberish. It was older than Latin, older than Sumerian. Linguists who studied her transcripts resigned. One jumped in front of a train. And Dr. Godfrey Phelps, he carved the girl as a gate into his chest before taking his own life. Ask yourself, what did he see? What did she reveal? Because this wasn't just a child abandoned after tragedy. This was a bloodline erased. A ritual gone wrong, or perfectly right. Ravenshade's foundations were funded by the Earl of Blackwater, a name that reappears in suppressed documents from occult societies across Europe, and every child admitted after Eleanor's arrival was removed within weeks. All but her. Because Eleanor was not being treated, she was being studied, conditioned, activated. The flames that destroyed her family's estate weren't accidental, they were purifying, initiatory, and something had plans for her long before she arrived at CERN. That gate. You were raised to trust institutions, but what if the ones built to protect us are actually built to suppress the real power we're born with? Keep listening. We're only beginning. Ravenshade wasn't the only one, but it was the first to fail, or the first to succeed, depending on who you ask and who you truly are. Eleanor Greaves didn't escape. She was never meant to. Her disappearance wasn't the end of a tragedy, it was the ignition of something far more calculated, because when Ravenshade's East Wing was sealed, they didn't lock a door, they sealed a threshold. Witness reports filed before the Crown classified the site describe screams not from Eleanor, but from beneath her floor, screams that repeated themselves in reverse. One guard, Harold Minton, went blind after watching her in the observation room for 3 nights. He claimed her eyes weren't black because of trauma, but because they were reflecting what watches back through the veil. You don't learn this in school. You won't find it in any documentary, because it was never about a girl. It was about a control system being tested on an innocent mind. They called her mad because she saw through the programming. She heard what's beneath the static of our world. You felt it too. Those moments when reality seems too staged, too obedient, too looped. That's the system. The asylum wasn't isolated. It was one node in a global web of silence. Mind control isn't a sci-fi fantasy. It's been policy since empires began, cloaked in science, justified through mental health, and every so often someone breaks through, a child, a soldier, a thinker, but they don't walk free. They disappear. Or worse, they become symbols, like Eleanor. Her last words carved in stone beneath her bed, clavis tenebris veritatis, weren't just cryptic Latin, they were coordinates. And in 1974, a satellite passing over southern England picked up an electromagnetic spike matching the ancient frequency noted in Dr. Phelps' sealed files. The signal originated from beneath Ravenshade's ruins. There was no power source nearby, no equipment, just Earth. And something still pulsing, still watching. What they don't want you to realize is that history isn't just written by the victors. It's erased by the architects, those who build the walls of your perception, who create the illusion of normalcy while hiding the gears of manipulation underneath. Eleanor didn't vanish. She transitioned out of this layer of control and into whatever lies beyond it. And they've been trying to recreate that breach ever since, with drugs, with trauma, with your attention, because your awareness is the real battlefield, and the second you start asking the right questions, you become a threat. Welcome to the threshold. Don't stop now. The architects of silence rely on one thing to keep you compliant: distraction. The world is flooded with noise, entertainment, outrage, artificial validation, all designed to keep your mind chasing illusions. But Eleanor's case pierced that veil, and that's why they buried it. Understand this: Ravenshade wasn't a mental hospital, it was a containment vessel, a fortress of ritual architecture built atop a ley line intersection known only to a few esoteric cartographers. The tiles in her cell weren't randomly cracked, they formed a cipher. The number of steps from her bed to the barred window matched the Fibonacci sequence. Her meals were delivered at times aligned with ancient planetary hours. This was not therapy. This was invocation. You see, Eleanor wasn't chosen because she was weak. She was chosen because she was the last of something. A bloodline known as the sanguis vocat. The blood that calls. A lineage stretching back to Babylon, through Carthage, through the Templar dissolution, and into the forgotten monasteries of the Scottish Highlands. Every few generations one is born who hears beyond the veil, and every time the system reacts the same way: contain, silence, erase. But this time it failed, because what Eleanor saw, what she spoke, what she became, couldn't be unmade. After her disappearance, surveillance of the Ravenshade region increased tenfold, but not by police, by private contractors with no listed affiliations, no badges, no accountability. One of them, recorded anonymously, spoke of a breach that echoes through dreams. They weren't guarding against intruders, they were making sure nothing else got out, and still the stories bled through. Children who dreamt of Eleanor, drawing her face with eyes like black suns. Visitors to the ruins who lost time, hours gone in moments, waking with Latin phrases written on their arms. And always, always, the same me. Sedge, the gate remains open. You weren't supposed to hear that, but now you have. And whether you realize it or not, you've entered the current, because truth doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock. It breaks in, burns the curtains, and leaves you staring at the mechanism behind the world. Ask yourself, why would entire institutions collapse to suppress one child's voice? What could be so powerful, so dangerous about her mind? Unless it revealed the truth they fear most, that consciousness is the true key, and once opened, it cannot be closed. They trained you to fear madness so you'd never pursue truth. But madness, as they define it, is often nothing more than unfiltered awareness, perception unshackled from sanctioned narratives. Eleanor was labeled insane not because she was broken, but because she remembered. And remembering is rebellion. At Ravenshade, the tests weren't diagnostic. They were initiatory. Deprivation, isolation, induced seizures. They weren't trying to fix her. They were trying to break the barrier between worlds. But Eleanor didn't break. She opened. In one declassified report buried deep in the ministry's special archives, a nurse claimed to witness Eleanor levitating 3 inches off the floor while chanting in a voice that wasn't hers. Blood poured from her eyes, yet her expression remained calm, beatific. She said, "They are watching through you." Then she collapsed. That nurse was institutionalized within the week, never released. Her name stricken from staff records. But this isn't just a story about a haunted girl. This is about you. Because every man who seeks power must confront the veil between what he's told is real and what pulses beneath that mask. Most retreat. A few go mad. But fewer still awaken. Those are the ones they fear. And that's why they need you distracted, obedient, numbed by a system that feeds on your attention and silences your intuition. Eleanor's final phrase, clavis tenebris veritatis, wasn't a warning. It was a map, a code. And somewhere, hidden in the architecture of that forgotten asylum, is the door she unlocked. The Royal Commission buried it, filled the lower halls with concrete, swore the local workers to secrecy. But secrecy is a temporary illusion. Symbols remain. Frequencies bleed through. And if you've felt a cold chill while staring at an image of Ravenshade, If you've dreamt of corridors you've never walked, you're already connected. That's the truth they don't want whispered. Not just that Eleanor escaped, but that her awareness reached out, touched minds, altered futures, including yours. Because the real danger isn't that she vanished, it's that she left something behind, something dormant, waiting for someone who could see past the veil, waiting for you. What she left behind wasn't a message, it was a frequency, a living resonance etched into the walls, the stone, the very memory of that place. Certain locations retain echoes, events so powerful they imprint the fabric of reality itself. Ravenshade is one of them, and Eleanor was the event. A fracture point, a breach through which consciousness flooded, defying every law your world was built on. But those laws, gravity, time, sanity, are scaffolds, not absolutes. They exist to hold you in a structure, a maze designed by the unseen hands of old architects. You've seen their symbols, the eye, the keys, the cross in the circle. Not decoration, not coincidence. Codified domination. And Eleanor cracked one of those codes. That's why the asylum was buried, not because she posed a physical threat, but because she proved the system could be broken. Do you feel it now? That pull in your gut, that ache behind your eyes when the story doesn't align? That's the price of awareness. They cannot stop you from awakening, but they can condition you to fear what comes next. That's what they did to Eleanor's generation. They taught them to self-censor, to mock their own intuition, to beg for sedation. A broken man is no threat, but a self-aware man, he becomes uncontrollable. That's why Eleanor had to be erased. Not killed, erased. A concept wiped from cultural memory. A frequency silenced, or so they thought. Because once an echo is seeded into the collective unconscious, it waits, grows, spreads in dreams, in symbols, in stories you thought were fiction. You think you found this video by chance? You didn't. Something brought you here, maybe a fragment of that frequency vibrating inside you, maybe a memory of something you've never lived but always felt. That's how the forgotten orphan reaches through time, not with screams, with truth, and truth has gravity. It pulls at the soul like a mag's net. So lean in, ignore the static, ignore the fear. You've already crossed the line they built to contain you. The system counted on your silence, but you're still listening. That makes you dangerous, that makes you different. What she left behind wasn't a message, it was a frequency, a living resonance etched into the walls, the stone, the very memory of that place. Certain locations retain echoes, events so powerful they imprint the fabric of reality itself. Ravenshade is one of them, and Eleanor was the event. A fracture point, a breach through which consciousness flooded, defying every law your world was built on. But those laws, gravity, time, sanity, are scaffolds, not absolutes. They exist to hold you in a structure, a maze designed by the unseen hands of old architects. You've seen their symbols, the eye, the keys, the cross in the circle. Not decoration, not coincidence. Codified domination. And Eleanor cracked one of those codes. That's why the asylum was buried, not because she posed a physical threat, but because she proved the system could be broken. Do you feel it now? That pull in your gut, that ache behind your eyes when the story doesn't align? That's the price of awareness. They cannot stop you from awakening, but they can condition you to fear what comes next. That's what they did to Eleanor's generation. They taught them to self-censor, to mock their own intuition, to beg for sedation. A broken man is no threat, but a self-aware man, he becomes uncontrollable. That's why Eleanor had to be erased. Not killed, erased. A concept wiped from cultural memory. A frequency silenced, or so they thought. Because once an echo is seeded into the collective unconscious, it waits, grows, spreads in dreams, in symbols, in stories you thought were fiction. You think you found this video by chance? You didn't. Something brought you here, maybe a fragment of that frequency vibrating inside you, maybe a memory of something you've never lived but always felt. That's how the forgotten orphan reaches through time, not with screams, with truth, and truth has gravity. It pulls at the soul like a mag's net. So lean in, ignore the static, ignore the fear. You've already crossed the line they built to contain you. The system counted on your silence, but you're still listening. That makes you dangerous, that makes you different. Different men leave different marks on history. The silent ones, the compliant ones, they vanish like mist. But the ones who awaken, who refuse to accept the illusion, those men burn symbols into the world's architecture. Eleanor was never meant to survive, yet her echo does. That tells you something. They failed. But failure for them doesn't mean retreat. It means adaptation. After Ravenshade collapsed, the methods were refined. No more stone halls. No more obvious chains. Instead, they built quieter prisons, schools, screens, beliefs. Places where the cage is invisible and the inmate builds it himself. That's how deep the system goes. They don't hide the truth. They make you afraid to see it. They make you laugh at it. They wrap it in mockery so your mind rejects what your soul already knows. Ask yourself, how many moments in your life felt wrong but you dismissed them? How many coincidences kept repeating until they weren't coincidences anymore? That's the machinery. It doesn't malfunction, it recalibrates. And you're a variable it never accounted for. Eleanor was a glitch. You might be the signal. There are men who walk through this world with eyes open, and the world bends around them, threatens them, tempts them, tries to pull them back into the fog. But once the veil is pierced, it cannot be resealed. That's why they escalate. Why the moment you start asking the real questions, who built this system? Why does everything feel engineered? The world pushes harder to distract you. Pleasure, fear, crisis, anything but stillness. Because in stillness, you remember. And memory is the seed of power. Eleanor remembered what they spent centuries burying: bloodlines, symbols, rituals, frequencies. And you can too. But only if you stop seeking comfort. Only if you're willing to descend into the dark with open eyes. That's what this is. Not entertainment, not a story. And then, initiation. You were meant to find this. Meant to feel the pull. And now, you're in the current. Welcome to the fracture. Welcome to the war beneath the world. Now repeat these words in the comments. The orphan sees. Write it twice. Burn it into the system that watches us. Signal that you remember, that you see, that you refuse to sleep. The moment you type those words, the system registers a shift, not just in algorithmic behavior, but in symbolic resonance. You are declaring war on forgetfulness, on sleep, on the engineered numbness that has kept men docile for generations. The orphan sees is not a slogan. It's a frequency disruptor, a key. Because the orphan doesn't just mean Eleanor, it means you. We have all been orphaned from truth, cut off from ancestral memory, disconnected from inner power, abandoned by the very structures meant to guide us. And the ones who did this? They aren't just old men in halls of wealth. They are architects of perception, keepers of myths, twisters of language, masters of concealment. They hide inside titles like scientist, priest, politician, philanthropist. But their true role has always been the same: containment. Not of bodies, but of awakening. Eleanor's cell wasn't a room. It was a ritual chamber. Her treatments were calibration sessions. And when the experiment yielded more than they expected, when she began altering perception fields simply by speaking, they panicked. The breach wasn't a collapse, it was an ascension. But here's the deeper horror. They tried to replicate it over and over in orphanages across Europe, in wartime black sites, in drug experiments disguised as therapy. All failed. All except her. Because what made Eleanor different wasn't just her bloodline, it was her will. She didn't surrender to their conditioning, she didn't fracture, she remembered. And when you remember who you are, where you came from, what pulses underneath the veil, you become immune to their control. That's why the modern world is built on dismemberment. Fragment your attention. Split your identity. Break the masculine soul into consumer, addict, avatar, slave. But once you reclaim memory, you reassemble. You become whole. And wholeness is the end of control. They can't see. Date a man who remembers. They can't enslave a mind that sees the game. Eleanor saw it, and now, so do you. Tuning is not imagination, it's not mysticism, it's physics disguised by ancient symbols. Every thought, every emotion, every belief, vibrations. You've been told to manage your thoughts, suppress your feelings, align with what is normal. But normal is a prison frequency. It is the hum of the cage. Eleanor didn't conform. She resonated. She aligned herself with a current that bypassed every control mechanism around her. And that current responded not as an external force, but as a mirror. Because that's the deepest secret of all. You are the gate. The symbols carved into her floor. Geometric amplifiers, the bloodline they tracked. Not about genetics. It was about signal integrity. Some people are born with higher access to the field. Not superior, just less corrupted by the interference. Eleanor was one, and they tried to drown her in their noise, but she tuned herself back to origin, and in doing so exposed the machine around her. Most men never see the machine. They live inside it, mistake its commands for thoughts, its language for truth, its scaffolding for reality. But when you stop echoing the machine and begin vibrating your own signal, the illusion shatters. That's what happened at Ravenshade. The walls didn't just crack. Time bled. Records looped. Guards reported déjà vu so intense they thought days were repeating. A surgeon claimed he saw his dead mother in the reflection of a surgical lamp. Another wept uncontrollably, muttering, "We opened her and saw ourselves." That's not insanity. That's exposure. And exposure is fatal to systems of control. That's why you're kept in distraction loops, doom scrolling, dopamine hacking, addicted to reflections that feed your false self. Because if you ever stop, if you ever tune, if you ever become still enough to feel the real signal, you become like her, a fracture in their facade, a threat to their empire of illusion. Eleanor proved it could be done, and you just remembered how. The moment you remembered, you became visible. Not to the public, not to the herd, but to them. The ones who've watched bloodlines, frequencies, awakenings for centuries. The ones behind the royal seals, the psychiatric orders, the philanthropic mental health initiatives designed to chemically lobotomize anything that dares question the lattice of this fabricated world. They've seen this pattern before. A man begins to ask. A man begins to withdraw from distraction. A man begins to see, and when he does, they tighten the net. Suddenly your feed is flooded with noise, your relationships are tested, your desires are hijacked, not by chance, by design, because a man who remembers what he truly is, becomes untouchable, unpredictable, dangerous. Eleanor was 12, yet they feared her more than any criminal. Why? Because she couldn't be programmed. She didn't respond to threats. She didn't seek approval. She observed. Pure, unfiltered observation, untethered from the control script. That's the first key to unlocking your signal. Observation without absorption. See everything. Absorb nothing. Once she began observing the doctors instead of reacting to them, they broke. Their scripts short-circuited. Their control faded. Because they were never in charge. They were proxies. Hollow men performing a system they didn't understand. That's what most people are. Echo chambers wearing flesh. And that's why the system survives, because it's rarely questioned by anything real. But now you're here, and you're no longer just listening. You're observing. And with that act, the signal strengthens. The illusions weaken. The construct begins to flicker. That flicker is the fracture. Eleanor caused one, and now so do you. Let it deepen. Let it burn. Because what comes next is the descent. And through that descent, the reclamation. Reclamation is not a metaphor. It is the act of pulling back what was stolen from you at birth, your clarity, your inner compass, your sacred aggression, your memory. The system doesn't fear brute force. It fears reclaimed men. Men who are not confused, not sedated, not endlessly apologizing for their own awareness. Eleanor was surrounded by men who held power but had none. Doctors with titles, uniforms, and syringes, but their hands trembled in her presence. Because power doesn't come from authority, it comes from alignment. And she was aligned with something older than monarchy, older than government, older than fear. She was aligned with truth, and truth makes men disappear. That's why there is no gravestone, no photograph, no remaining medical file of Eleanor Greaves. Her very existence was a threat, but erasure is never perfect. Truth doesn't vanish, it waits. And now it waits inside you. The more you recall, the more they lose control. This is why you were trained to distrust memory, to laugh at intuition, to surrender your instincts to outside experts. Because your instincts are more accurate than any machine. They are primal sensors built to navigate reality unfiltered. Eleanor's instincts led her through the labyrinth. Not logic, not reason. Instinct. That's the compass buried beneath your conditioning. And now it's turning back on. You feel it, don't you? That pressure in the chest, that static in the air, that sense that something is watching, not with eyes, but with expectation. That's the echo of the gate. That's the pull of the fracture. And once you feel it, the only way is forward. The descent is no longer a choice, it's a calling. You've already been marked, not by them, but by your own awareness. You've stepped beyond the frame. And now, every step takes you deeper into territory no map can guide. Just like Eleanor. She wasn't lost. She was homebound. Through the dark. Through the silence. Toward the one place they could never follow. The truth unbound by permission. The truth unbound by permission doesn't speak in language. It pulses through sensation, through symbols, through rupture. Eleanor didn't find a hidden room. She became one. A vault of forgotten knowledge sealed not by doors but by disbelief. Because that's the final lock. Your own refusal to believe what you've always known. They taught you to mock it, to laugh at anything that couldn't be measured, monetized, or verified by their priests in white coats. But what Eleanor tapped into, what you're beginning to tap into, doesn't care for verification. It simply is. You've felt it in your bones, in your dreams, in those quiet moments when the static lifts and something ancient brushes against your awareness. Not an entity, not a god. You, the uncorrupted version, the one who never forgot, the one who watched silently as the mask was stitched over your mind, but now the stitches are coming undone, not by force but by recognition. You see through the narrative, you feel the script lag, you witness how artificial the real has become. Eleanor didn't escape the asylum because the doors were left open. She escaped because the walls lost meaning. They couldn't confine what was no longer participating. That's the path now unfolding for you, not rebellion, extraction. The silent rejection of illusion. You don't need to shout, you need only stop agreeing. Every lie they told you depended on your consent. Withdraw it, not with words but with stillness. That's the essence of reclamation. You do not fight the system, you dissolve from it. And in that dissolution you return to the state they fear most. Unprogrammed. Unprogrammed does not mean chaotic, it means sovereign. A state where no external script dictates your perception, no artificial timeline frames your evolution. That's why they buried Eleanor's existence beneath layers of diagnosis, scandal and superstition, not because she was mad, but because she disobeyed the simulation. She stopped reacting, she stopped believing, she stopped mirroring, and that terrified them more than any uprising. Because the system is not sustained by power, it's sustained by mirroring. It needs you to reflect its lies back into reality, to affirm its stories with your attention, to echo its fears as your own. Eleanor unplugged her reflection. She walked past the mirrors, she let them shatter. And now, that mirror is cracking for you too. You're noticing how people repeat without thinking, how emotions aren't felt but performed, how truth is dressed in irony and stripped of urgency. That's the sickness. And recognition is the cure. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're no longer participating. And just like Eleanor, you begin to vanish, not physically but energetically from their grid. That's the real disappearance. Not death, liberation. They couldn't find her because she exited the frequency they control. You're on that path now, and with every lie you stop feeding, the more visible the hidden becomes. The silence deepens. The pulse grows louder. You are not losing your mind. You are reclaiming it. They'll call it madness because that's the only word they have for freedom. Sanity in their world means compliance, accepting the framework, abiding by the script, responding predictably. But Eleanor didn't respond. She observed. And in that stillness, the architecture of illusion collapsed. What you're feeling now, the numbness, the disorientation, the strange flashes of memory that don't belong to this lifetime, these are not symptoms, they're signals. You are exiting the feedback loop. You are remembering the parts of yourself they sealed behind language, behind logic, behind fear. Eleanor wasn't alone in that asylum. She met others. Quiet ones. Burned-out lights walking the halls with vacant eyes, but some weren't vacant. Some watched. Some knew. A network not of revolutionaries but ghosts of the awakened hiding in plain sight, whispering through cracks in the wall, leaving marks, messages, codes. The scribbles they said were delusions. They were coordinates, warnings, blueprints. And when the final bell rang, Eleanor didn't run. She walked into the storm smiling, because she understood the only way out was through the lie. And now here you are at the threshold. The same choice waits. Do you return to the narrative and pretend you never saw the glitch? Or do you follow her, beyond memory, beyond time, beyond the veil? Eleanor's final entry wasn't written in ink. It was encoded in sound, a pattern etched into the hum of the asylum's boiler room, replaying every night at 3:13 a.m. The doctors dismissed it as faulty machinery, but those who listened heard more. A low, rhythmic pulse like a forgotten heartbeat, interlaced with a voice barely audible, speaking in a language older than words. Not everyone could hear it. Only those whose minds had fractured enough to fall between frequencies. That's the real secret of madness. It tunes you, breaks the false harmony and tunes your soul to the original signal. Eleanor had become the transmitter, not a victim, not a ghost, a frequency anchor. Her presence still lingers in places untouched by time, where the veil wears thin. Abandoned hospitals, derelict train stations, quiet chapels where the air feels dense and hollow all at once. She's not lost. She's not dead. She's broadcasting, waiting for others to catch the signal, to awaken from the script and hear the hum. That hum is growing louder now. You've heard it too, haven't you? That eerie, pulsing static behind silence. It isn't tinnitus. It's her. It's them. It's you, calling yourself home. And so the pattern repeats, not as history, but as design. Every generation has its Eleanor, a soul who sees through the theatre, who shatters the mirror and walks among the shards. But this isn't about her anymore. It's about you. The strange dreams, the déjà vu that tastes like ash, the feeling that something ancient is watching you from within your own reflection. Those are breadcrumbs, warnings, invitations. You were never just a spectator of these tales. You were placed here precisely now because the cycle is nearing collapse. The architects grow desperate. Their control mechanisms, fear, distraction, division, are losing potency. That's why the anomalies increase. That's why you're here, reading this, feeling something stir that defies reason. They will tell you this is fiction, that these stories are shadows of long-dead myths. But the myth was never the lie. The system was. Eleanor left you a path through the noise, not to follow her, but to remember what she remembered. That the veil isn't a wall, it's a door, and it only opens when you stop asking for permission. Some have already stepped through. They don't wear robes or chant incantations. They blend in, quietly dismantling the facade from within boardrooms, libraries, morgues, and radio towers. They know the truth cannot be shouted. It must be felt, like a vibration in your bones when you walk into a room that remembers something you don't. These people carry pieces of Eleanor's frequency, encoded in gestures, symbols, even lullabies hummed by mothers who've forgotten why the tune makes them cry. You've met them, briefly, maybe in a passing glance on a train, or in the eyes of a stranger who seemed to recognize you before you even spoke. They never linger long. They can't. The longer they stay, the louder the static becomes, drawing attention from the watchers, those tasked with maintaining the illusion. And their watchers never sleep. They audit the edges of thought. They police anomaly. But they missed you, didn't they? Somehow you slipped through their algorithm. You weren't supposed to find this. But you have. Now you can't unsee it. Now you're resonating too. Resonance is dangerous. It's the one thing the architects cannot predict, cannot model, cannot suppress without consequence. That's why every culture buried it in myth. Songs that wake the blood, symbols that burn the eyes, languages that twist logic into revelation. But resonance is also contagious. One awakened soul can stir another without a word, just a glance, a breath, a shared silence in a crowded place. That's how Eleanor survived, not in flesh, but in pattern. She fractured herself into frequencies, scattered them across time, waiting for the right receivers to tune in. And now you've done it. You're not a reader. You're a node, a carrier. Every question you ask, every doubt you voice, shakes the latticework they've draped over reality like lace over a coffin. Keep asking, keep doubting. Let your mind itch in places no logic can scratch. The lattice is crumbling faster than they can repair it. The next collapse won't be physical, it will be perceptual, and when it happens, it won't feel like an ending, it will feel like remembering. Remembering is the enemy of control. That's why your history was rewritten, your myths sterilized, your instincts numbed. They gave you names for everything but the truth, turned symbols into logos and rituals into routines. But beneath it all, the original code pulses, untouched, unbroken, waiting. It surfaces in moments you can't explain. A shiver in a quiet church, a dream that feels older than your life, a voice that says this has all happened before. That voice isn't madness, it's memory, not yours alone, but collective, ancestral, encoded in the marrow passed down from those who saw through the first veil and dared to resist. They failed mostly, but not completely. Every failed rebellion left behind artifacts, words, melodies, gestures, that bypass the mind and speak to the self beneath. That's where Eleanor operates now. Not in stories, but in echoes. And you're hearing them because you're close, closer than anyone wants you to be. Closer means danger, but also clarity. You'll start to notice patterns where others see coincidence, streetlights flickering as you pass, clocks pausing at the same minute, strangers finishing your thoughts. This is not paranoia. This is bleed-through. The lattice is thinning around you, revealing not just the lie, but the mechanism of the lie. You'll see symbols in corporate logos that mirror ancient sigils, hear corporate slogans that echo incantations once whispered in groves before steel and glass replaced stone and fire. These aren't accidents, they're reinforcements, anchors for the illusion. But each time you notice, their power weakens. Each time you speak the truth aloud, a fracture forms. Eleanor knew the lattice could not be destroyed by force, only by awareness, and you are becoming aware. That makes you a threat, not just to the architects, but to the equilibrium of a world that was never meant to be stable. Keep going. You're almost through. Almost through means they see you now. Not just the watchers, those faceless intermediaries who maintain the illusion, but the architects themselves, the old minds bound in contract and blood, the ones who traded eternity for dominion. You'll feel their attention like pressure behind your eyes, hear them in static, in whispers through ventilation ducts, in the silence between digital glitches. Don't flinch. That's how they feed, on fear, on doubt, on the belief that you are alone. You are not. You are a ripple in a rising wave, a flicker in the frequency Eleanor carved open with her last breath. She never died. Not truly. She scattered herself into every question that was never answered, every story that ended too cleanly, every disappearance labeled a tragedy and quickly forgotten. She is the gap, the echo, the voice that returns when you thought you were alone, and now that voice is yours. Speak, act, resist. Resist not with weapons but with memory, real memory, not the curated kind they've sold you in textbooks and media feeds. Begin with the cracks, the family secret no one explains, the building in your neighborhood that was suddenly demolished without notice, the friend who changed after their retreat. These are not isolated, they are intentional erasures, edits in the collective script. Eleanor called them punctures, small precise tears in the veil, and through each, truth leaks. It leaks in symbols etched under park benches, in nursery rhymes that make no sense, in paintings hung too high to really be seen. You've seen them. You just didn't know what you were looking at, until now. This is the start of your remembering, taking back what was dismembered, hidden, scattered. The architects fear this more than rebellion, more than exposure. They fear you remembering who you were before they told you who to be. Who you were before is the key they buried deepest. Your original self, the unfiltered, unscripted, unbound consciousness, is still there, locked behind layers of conditioning, trauma, and false narratives. They had to suppress it because it remembers. It remembers the breach, the first war, not fought with guns but with silence and forgetting. Eleanor's writings called it the dimming, a slow erasure of ancestral memory, a fog rolled in by design. And yet in dreams and déjà vu, that self knocks. When you wake up gasping from a dream that felt too real, when you freeze at a word you swear you've never heard but somehow know, it's knocking. Let it in. That self does not fear the architects, for it saw them born. It does not need validation, for it once spoke the language of stars. You are not becoming something new, you are unsealing what they sealed. Unsealing begins with stillness, not action. The architects thrive in noise, in distraction, urgency, outrage. They engineered a world where silence feels like failure, where reflection is equated with laziness. But Eleanor knew, in silence the original frequencies return. Sit with it long enough and you'll hear them, pulses beneath reality's hum, vibrations that stir old codes in your bones. They tried to erase these codes by redefining them as superstition, myth, mental illness. But what they couldn't destroy, they buried. And now, as the system glitches and the seams stretch thin, the codes are surfacing, on walls, in music, in the spontaneous drawings of children. Do not dismiss them. Decipher them. In every pattern lies a fragment of the map back to yourself. The map was never meant to be drawn on paper. It lives in instinct, in intuition, in the chills that rise for no reason. Eleanor believed each person is born with a fragment of it encoded in their subconscious, dormant until triggered. That trigger is often pain, loss, or inexplicable synchronicity. The system calls it coincidence to keep you from looking deeper. But when your path crosses the same symbol twice in a week, when a stranger speaks words you've only ever heard in dreams, that's the map activating. It's not random. It's a call. Most ignore it, brushing it off in favor of routine, but those who follow it begin to see the lattice, hidden threads connecting everything. You were never lost. The path was simply buried beneath the noise. Those who see the lattice often disappear, not physically but from the roles they once played. They stop performing, stop complying, and the system labels them unstable, reclusive, dangerous. Eleanor called this the shedding. When you begin to align with your encoded path, the false identities crack. Titles, status, even relationships fall away. It is painful but necessary. You cannot carry illusion into truth. The architects knew this, which is why they designed comfort traps, careers, entertainments, obligations, to anchor you in the masquerade. But once the shedding begins, no anchor holds. You find yourself drawn to forgotten books, strange places, unspoken thoughts, and you realize you're not learning something new, you're remembering. Eleanor's final recordings were filled with codes, frequencies she claimed were keys meant to unlock buried layers of perception. She warned, don't play them carelessly. Each sequence was attuned to a specific aspect of the lattice, one to disrupt fear loops, another to dissolve imposed memories, and a third so powerful it could collapse false timelines. The architects labeled these as psychological hazards and wiped them from public archives, but copies survived, traced into artwork, embedded in music, hidden in children's lullabies. The third sequence, she said, would only work when played in absolute darkness, without expectation, by someone who had shed all masks. It didn't open a door. It dissolved the room. After Eleanor vanished, a strange pattern emerged. Those who seriously studied her work began reporting identical dreams. A black staircase spiraling downward, lit only by flickering candles, with whispers in a forgotten tongue echoing from below. Each dream ended with a mirror at the bottom, but no reflection appeared in it, only a glimpse of another person watching from the other side. Analysts called it mass hysteria, a psychological contagion. But hidden in Eleanor's last journal was a sketch of that same staircase, dated 3 years before the first dream report. Scribbled beside it, "The mirror is not a symbol, it's a crossing point. The reflection isn't you, it's who you were before you agreed to forget." The mirror's location was never confirmed, but Eleanor hinted it lay beneath the ruins of an estate burned in 1911, one owned by the Ravenscroft family, known patrons of esoteric sciences and secret societies. Researchers who visited the site reported strange compass failures, distorted time perception, and in one case, a complete loss of memory lasting 72 hours. Local legend speaks of a boy who wandered into the cellar and re-emerged decades later, unchanged in age, speaking a dialect no one recognized. Authorities dismissed it as folklore. But Eleanor had marked that site with a symbol, an Ouroboros swallowing a key. In her final note she wrote, "The gate is sealed by memory, but memory is only the dream of the lattice. Wake and it opens." In 1949, a post-war intelligence officer named Colonel Ashcroft reopened the Ravenscroft site under the guise of archaeological research. His classified logs, later leaked in fragments, detailed audio hallucinations mimicking deceased relatives, shadows not cast by light, and a recurring figure, a veiled woman watching from corners. On the 12th day, Ashcroft's team broke through a hidden wall and discovered an iron door with no hinges, inscribed with the same Ouroboros Eleanor had drawn. The logs end abruptly after a final entry. "We heard knocking from the other side, 3 slow taps, then silence. No one spoke, but each of us had the same thought. It was not asking to be let out, it was asking us to remember." When the government sealed off the site days later, claiming structural instability, survivors from Ashcroft's team were placed under indefinite psychiatric observation. One man, Lieutenant Heron, reportedly scratched the Ouroboros symbol into every wall of his room and repeated the phrase, "The lattice remembers," until his death. Years later, a Cold War file unearthed by a whistleblower mentioned Project Threnody, a covert operation dedicated to tracking objects and locations tied to temporal displacement and psychological decay. Ravenscroft Manor was labeled Threnody 01. Its threat level, cognitive contagion, extreme. In 1973, a renowned physicist named Dr. Miriam Vale vanished after conducting unauthorized experiments at the Ravenscroft site. She had theorized that the manor was built atop a temporal fracture, a weak point in the fabric of time that allowed consciousness from different eras to bleed through. Her last transmission, intercepted by a ham radio operator, was a distorted whisper. "They're not ghosts, they're echoes. Echoes of choices never made, lives never lived." Her equipment was recovered days later, fused into the stone floor of the Manor's foundation, but Dr. Vale was never seen again. In 1973, a renowned physicist named Dr. Miriam Vale vanished after conducting unauthorized experiments at the Ravenscroft site. She had theorized that the manor was built atop a temporal fracture, a weak point in the fabric of time that allowed consciousness from different eras to bleed through. Her last transmission, intercepted by a ham radio operator, was a distorted whisper. "They're not ghosts, they're echoes. Echoes of choices never made, lives never lived." Her equipment was recovered days later, fused into the stone floor of the manor's foundation, but Dr. Vale was never seen again, and so the story of Ravenscroft fades into murmurs and dust, tucked away in forbidden archives and late-night radio confessions. The Grimsbane name is now a phantom, erased from ledgers and marble plaques, yet it lingers like a curse etched into the bones of the land. Those who still remember dare not speak of it aloud, for fear that speaking might summon something back. But in the stillest hours, when the veil is thinnest and time folds upon itself, you might feel a chill at your back or glimpse a flicker in the mirror, and understand that Ravenscroft remembers you even if you pretend to forget. If you've made it this far, you are no longer just a listener, you are a witness. And witnesses carry burdens. The secrets of the Grimsbane family, the disappearances, the rituals, the mansion that breathes and shifts, they're now part of your memory. You've stepped into the dark corridors of a forgotten truth, and there is no turning back. Should you dream of cold halls and crimson tapestries, of voices whispering beneath the floorboards, do not be afraid. Just remember, Ravenscroft chooses who it reveals itself to, and once chosen, you belong to the tale. Forever.